Hi everybody, this is April Rashad coming to you with another segment of TLS Weight Loss Solution, and today we're talking about how to break habits and how to create better ones. So part of that, big part of that actually, is getting off of the sweet stuff. So today we're going to be talking a lot about sugar and sugar alternatives and how it really is affecting our weight loss efforts. But remember that these webinars have been designed as an adjunct to the incredible tools that we have available to us through the TLS system. And so these recorded webinars are really just intended to provide extra support and guidance, more information, and are not intended to replace all the critical tools and resources that we have through TLS and through TLSslim.com. But as coaches, we got together and knew that this was a lot of pertinent and relevant information to help you, so we wanted to make sure that we could provide extra support and sometimes remote support. Don't forget about your TLS guide, which has a ton of great information right in it, and TLSslim.com, which is dynamic and always changing, is always being updated with better tools, easier functionality, more recipes, and so you want to make sure that you have a subscription to that so that you can journal, keep track of everything online, and be able to access the great videos, articles, resources that are available through there as well. Now, a change of lifestyle definitely means identifying what your bad habits are and then just creating healthy habits. If you think about it, before you started TLS, you had certain things you picked up for breakfast in the morning, for lunch, for snacks, for dinner. And so really what we're doing is not taking away tons of stuff from you. It's just how are we going to replace those automatic habits that you sometimes just don't even need to think about with healthy ones that are going to support what your health and your weight loss goals are going to be moving forward. Because if you can change your lifestyle for the better, it's going to, and you create these as, significant keystone habits, obviously you're going to be able to maintain this for years to come. So, start thinking about, have you ever switched from one food you like with another one that has just different ingredients that are maybe deemed to be a more healthy alternative? And so what I mean by that is that sometimes you'll see somebody who's diabetic who has everything that's sugar-based. They find out they can't do sugar, so now everything in their house has Splenda, but did they really change their habit? So you want to start thinking about that. Certainly there are ways to do menu makeovers and change foods and have things with better ingredients, but you don't want every single thing that you have to be sort of like your old lifestyle, but just having switched it. We want to be able to change our palate and really be kind of changing our entire lifestyle. Do you still crave sugars and carbohydrate-laden food? That could be an indication that maybe we haven't switched from old habits, or there's still some physiological need to change your body chemistry so that that's not happening. And that really happens through food and supplementation. And then are you continuing to add in more veggies and fruits and lean proteins as the base of your diet, which is always going to help you towards your long-term goal? So today we're going to discuss, what your habits are, help you to identify them, talk about sugars and artificial and regular types of sweeteners, and how to create new habits that are going to last a lifetime. So think about, taking an inventory of what your current habits are in all different aspects. They say that the way you do anything is the way you do everything. Are you an organized planner? None of us, all of us, at some point get to that point where we're just sick of cutting another vegetable. We're just sick of all the pre-planning. However, hopefully some of this stuff becomes part of your routine and your habit, which makes you have some sort of sense of, I feel organized, I feel in control, I know what it is that I'm planning to eat. So do you have those 2 to 3 meals that are the go-to? Do you have the snacks you pick up from? Or do you find yourself spinning out of control at a certain point of the day where you haven't pre-planned? Do you work out regularly? Are you, just a weekend warrior here or there? Do you have those little habits like you love to start the day with a warm beverage and it's always coffee with cream and sugar? Or have you changed that now and you've been able to replace that warm beverage with something different? Do you eat or drink socially or emotionally? Is that something that you might need to address? Do you replace items with alternate ingredients, or do you actually change the type of food that you're eating? Do you offset even, and delay your gratification sometimes if you do have a craving? Do you do things in a certain order, maybe, in terms of eating food or beverages? How do you handle cravings? What are your triggers? You want to just start thinking about some of these questions so you can identify what those areas are, what those specific behaviors or habits around food, and maybe you haven't given them some thought. Maybe you didn't realize that, it's when the kids come home from school and everything sort of feels like all of a sudden it's out of control, that's when your eating gets out of control, and maybe you need to offset that by having a snack before they come home, or whatever the case might be. You need to, plan for late nights at work, or, change the time of day that you exercise. So little things that we can do, but you have to take that inventory first. And remember, it does take 30 days to form a habit. It also is important to understand that our neurological pathways since birth have changed when we eat fat, salt, or sugar, meaning we are programmed to want fat, salt, and sugar, and the more we've eaten it our entire lives, the more ingrained that craving, that want for that kind of food has become. And that is really important to know, because sometimes we just feel it's us that's sabotaging our own efforts, but really a lot of that is a physiological pathway, really, if you will, that is driving us to want certain foods that we know we have some kind of a connection to, and we've already created that neurological pathway, those connections early on, and it's sort of amplified itself over time. So be aware that some of these things are going to make you feel like you're a drug addict coming off of a drug. Some people have sort of a morphine effect when they eat gluten, and that's going to make it very difficult to come off of that too. So, taking small habits, and like I say here, changing habits can start with small wins and then build into larger ones. There's some great books on habits that really kind of talk about sort of the, the neurology of it, so to speak. But one of the things they say is that if you just create keystone habits of maybe doing things in a certain order, or you have the same way that you start your day in the morning and the same way that you write down what you're going to eat for the day, those little wins can build into larger habits. So whatever those keystone habits, even if it's just cleaning your room in the morning, can help you to be more organized throughout the day in other areas. But you may just take the sort of inventory of what your habits are and just try to pick one that you're going to change. Like if it's just, gee, I just couldn't get off my coffee and I can't start myself from eating breakfast in the morning, maybe that's just the thing you say, I'm just going to tackle breakfast, and for 30 days, this is what I'm going to do instead, and I'm going to create that new habit, and then you can move on to another one. But it typically takes 30 days to form a new habit. It's just you have to be careful. It's like when you take your eyes off of the goal, those old habits can slip back in very easily if you allow them to. So it's that, gee, I've been doing so great for so long, then all of a sudden I'm away on a girls' weekend, and, what happened? I allowed, X, Y, and Z to fill back in, and now it's harder to get back on the bus. Now, for sugars and sweeteners, be aware that all sweet foods, anything you taste that's sweet, could lead to a sweet craving or a carbohydrate craving, because the carbs do break down to sugar as well. So, there's also people who are like drinking sodas, and they get off of that. They went on to diet sodas, which may have no calories, whatever, but they had artificial sweeteners in them. And so in theory, it's like, well, what's the problem with that? But the reality is that anything that you taste that's sweet could trick your body into an insulin response, even if no sugar is present. So even if you're having artificial sweeteners in everything that in theory aren't affecting your blood sugar or adding calories to your diet, they can trick your brain into thinking that there is sugar present, and then you get the response even though it's not. So, we talk about what's sort of, shown in the lab to spike your blood sugar, but be aware your body doesn't always know that something is artificial. And beverages can certainly be the biggest culprit of hidden sugars or artificial sweeteners. So you may not be drinking soda anymore, but you may be trying to sweeten your water. You may be going for the sweetened iced tea. And those things you have to be careful of too, even if you're using artificial sweeteners. But let's just talk about a little bit of information on soda after we talk about this rat study. There was a study that was done, and I love sharing this because I think it really speaks volumes about sugar and artificial sweeteners. And basically what happened is that they had a group of rats. They had 3 categories, basically. One group was being fed water. One group was being fed a sugar water that would be likened to the sweetness of a soda. And then one group was being given water with artificial sweetener in it. Then they were fed a brownie-like food. So something that was sweet, and what they found is that the 2 groups that were drinking the sweetened beverage, whether it was sugar or artificial sweetener, would eat the brownie and not be able to stop eating the brownie, whereas the group that was drinking the water could take a few nibbles of the brownie and walk away. So there were a lot of results from this study, but to narrow it down, they certainly had indicated the craving for something sweet by drinking something sweet, but they had also surmised in a study, based on further testing, that the artificial sweeteners that these rats were eating were interrupting their body's ability to know that they were satiated. So they didn't know that they were full, and then it continued the craving for them to want to continue to sort of, fit that in. So, also consider the fact the average soda has about 35 grams of sugar, or high fructose corn syrup or some sort like that, and it's about the equivalent to 17 to 20 teaspoons of sugar in any, let's say, 12 ounce, of soda. But sports drinks are not really that much better. So, you think about taking in a Gatorade or something because it's a hot sun or your kids have a sport. Nobody needs to have 25 grams of sugar, but you have to be careful. These big bottles of Gatorade, let's say, they have 25 grams of sugar per serving. If you look at the label, they actually contain 2 and sometimes 2.5 servings per bottle, which means that you're consuming 50-plus grams of sugar in one sitting. Sure, it has electrolytes in it, but really the average kid, if they're hydrating appropriately and they haven't gotten to a dehydration level, really don't need to replace those electrolytes, and there are other alternatives to electrolyte replacing beverages that don't have the amount of sugar that, let's say, something like a sports drink would have. The other thing to consider is that sodas, particularly because of the chemicals that are in them and the phosphoric acid, yields an acidic environment in your body and can cause your body to leach calcium from your bones to help to buffer that acidity. It's like a constant chemical reaction of your body trying to buffer that acidity. So part of the reason in this country why we have such high rates of osteoporosis are because of the fact, A, we're not moving as much, and so weight-bearing exercise can help with the density of bones. Certainly many of us are calcium and D deficient, but a lot of the calcium deficiency is coming not just from the lack of greens and things that we're eating. We eat way too many acidic and inflammatory foods that create acidic environment in our bodies, and it's not just the soda. It could be from an excess of proteins that are not balanced by anti-inflammatory foods and things of that nature that are really creating such a problem for us. So there's a huge need to hydrate. 75% of Americans are just walking around in a state of dehydration, and their thirst mechanism for at least a third of people is really so weak that it's mistaken for hunger. And that's why sometimes we say, if you do feel like you have a craving, have a glass of water first. Ask yourself first, would an apple handle my hunger right now? Because if it would, you're probably really hungry. If it wouldn't, if you're looking for something else, it's probably not really a true hunger. But it also can be, dehydration, the #1 trigger for daytime fatigue. And so, sometimes we go through the morning, we go through the night, we didn't hydrate enough yesterday, so we're just starting to hydrate, so you think you're drinking water, but you may already be sort of in the catch-up mode. And so by the afternoon, your daytime fatigue, the evening, that kind of kicks in. And then, of course, drinking water has so many positive benefits to it. So easing back pain and reducing the risk for certain types of cancer, boosting your metabolism. If you drink really cold water every day for that day, your metabolism can boost up to 30% for that day because your body has to warm the water that you're sipping in, the ice water. And then, of course, slight dips in hydration can negatively affect you, your memory, your attention, your ability to focus. You could get moody. There's all sorts of things that can happen when we're not hydrated. Just such an easy thing to fix. And you have to think about it like anything that you would add water to for the right consistency. You know how off-putting that can be. Let's say you were baking a cake or you were making pancakes or something. Not that many of you make pancakes anymore, but you know if there's not enough water in there, what that dough or that mixture looks like. And think about your body the same way. We're 70% water. When we're dehydrated, we're just shriveling everything up. We're not giving the lubrication and the ingredients that our body needs to be able to function properly, to be able to produce hormones, to just detox properly. So you have to make sure you're getting in enough of the right kind of fluid, and really water, herbal teas are really the best kind of hydration to get. Now, a couple other facts on sugar. Maybe not to you now because you've changed your lifestyle, but the average American consumes 140 pounds of sugar per year. That number has gone up in the last few years. And our ancestors only consumed 20 teaspoons per year. Now, we are seeing 20 teaspoons of sugar per soda, let's say. You can imagine the other hidden places that sugar will, be found, or your occasional holiday bouts where you have, sugar-laden foods and stuff. Our ancestors were consuming 20 teaspoons per year. So that, plus the fact that now we've got artificial things like high fructose corn syrup, which have increased in consumption in this country as well. We never used to have high fructose corn syrup. If we were eating sugar, it was raw or natural sugar. Now it's all processed. And now you have high fructose corn syrup. We were consuming 0 pounds. We're now up to 60 pounds per year. So that's huge. And in that time, obesity has tripled. Diabetes has increased 7-fold. So not that high fructose corn syrup is the only reason, because we know that we don't eat healthy, but it's in so many foods it can't be ignored. And, so if you are going to use sugar, I always tell people use real sugar, raw or raw honey. not processed sugar, but understand that honey, while it has great health benefits to it, can impede your progress. You know, sugar can impede your progress because we're looking to try to repair our insulin response and really get our body to a point where we're not requiring the sugar. So, you know, from a weight loss standpoint, if your cholesterol is an issue, all these other things we're trying to address, the more you can eliminate now or really cut down, obviously the better off you're going to be in the long term. Not that, you know, having a little bit of sugar or honey is going to be an issue for you later on, but you just need to kind of think about where you are in the process. Now, if you're looking at a label, let's say, and we did go over this on labels, you're always kind of looking for lower numbers better, and under 5 grams certainly would be better in terms of, you know, the effects that something's going to have to your blood sugar. But again, you just want to be careful because you're not just looking also then to replace the sweet things with use of alternatives, because sweet begets cravings for sweet. So that's where we just have to watch out a little bit. Now, I would suggest going to Huffington Post or going to Dr. Hyman, HYMAN.com, because he's just one of my favorite doctors who really speaks the same language that we do with TLS. And he's got some great articles. You can read more about this, but high fructose corn syrup, just to give you a little aside on that, is linked to obesity, fatty liver, diabetes, heart disease, cancer, dementia, and more. And, you know, you're hearing a ton in advertising right now, which is telling you, oh, no, you know, I'm worried about what my kids eat on the advertisements, you know, and then I found out that high fructose corn syrup is just the same as our body, you know, is cane sugar is, and sugar is sugar to our body. Not true. And so really it comes down to the biochemical, you know, structure of the two. Now, cane sugar, which you would know, you know, is like a 50-50 of fructose and glucose, and it has a bond between it. And high fructose corn syrup, excuse me, I wrote that wrong, it's 55-45, and it's not bonded. So it doesn't seem like a big thing when you write it down on paper, but here's the thing, because there's no bond between the chemical structure of the high fructose corn syrup, that means your body doesn't actually need to break that bond down. It doesn't need to break it down. So it splits up, and fructose goes right to your liver. Okay, that's why it's contributing to fatty liver. And the glucose goes right to your bloodstream to spike your insulin. So instead of your body using this breakdown and slowing down a little bit of the process of breaking down the real sugar, you know, instead it is not breaking it down, and it is very quickly affecting your body in a negative way. Why do they use it? Because it's cheaper, you know, and they can increase the amount that they're putting into sodas and give you a 20-ounce instead of a 12-ounce or an 8-ounce and still keep the manufacturing cost very low. But the food industry is, you know, comprising of about 17% of our overall economy. So don't be surprised by this. Understand that, you know, the FDA and the food industry in general, there are huge, huge corporations with a lot of money and a lot of politics behind this. So what you get on the surface is really, and what you hear in basic advertising is really a lot of times not true, and you have to look a little bit deeper. Also, you know that alternate names for sugar are going to be found in different things. So I think I might have mentioned this on another webinar, but, you know, I've seen branded shakes from other companies that come back and are boasting that they are a weight loss company, not to mention any names, though they might have the initials WW. And 3 out of the first 5 ingredients in that shake are going to be alternate names for sugar. Now, why do they use more than one name? Well, then they won't have to put it as the first ingredient, which would be the most prominent. And number 2, maybe they're using some inexpensive and some other, you know, for flavors or whatever, different types of sugar. So when you do look at a label, you know, you're not just looking for the grams, but you're also looking at the ingredients, and know that corn syrup, high fructose corn syrup, brown rice syrup, barley malt, maltodextrin, maple syrup, molasses, treacle, malt syrup, sorghum, dehydrated cane juice, or any kind of fruit juice concentrates, glucose, sucrose, maltose, saccharose, lactose, honey, and fructose are all possible names for sugar that you're going to find in the ingredient list. Now, a lot of times people will hear about lactose, so they'll look at the back of a dairy product and they'll say, oh my God, this is not under 5 grams of sugar. This has 8 grams of sugar or 7 grams of sugar. Many times in a dairy product, that is going to be the lactose, which is the the milk sugar that's just found in that dairy product. And so it's not added sugar. So on a label, you know, if you see a yogurt and it has 20 grams of sugar, that means probably 7 or 8 of that was the lactose, the milk sugar, and the rest of it was added sugar, which you'll find in the ingredient list. So, you know, be aware. You know, some people are not affected by dairy or milk, but if they are having some issues with lactose, typically it's the drinking milk that you're going to have a bigger problem with than the yogurt or the cottage cheese. and that's just because of the amount of the lactose that's in it and the way it's processed. So lactose intolerance is just when people don't have that digestive enzyme or enough of it to be able to break down the milk sugar. So you can take digestive enzymes to help you, but a lot of people probably shouldn't be drinking dairy. It is highly inflammatory. There are some studies that report that just drinking a glass of milk could give you a 300% increase in a blood sugar spike. So that's huge. So I'm not saying that I'm against necessarily, Greek yogurt or whatever. I think that on a person-by-person basis, you have to consider, is dairy an issue? Because for a lot of people, casein, which is the protein in dairy, the lactose, which is the sugar in dairy, can present an issue and may impede your progress if that's inflammatory, not just because it's an inflammatory food, but also highly sensitive or inflammatory for you. So you just have to keep that in mind. But in theory, the lactose, that extra 7 grams of the dairy sugar should not spike your blood sugar, should elevate slower. But again, drinking milk different than eating maybe something that has the protein to offset that, like in a Greek yogurt. Now, let's talk about artificial sweeteners real quick. Aspartame, saccharin, sucralose, sugar alcohols are what I'm calling artificial sweeteners. For the most part, these are the big ones. Now, aspartame is what you're going to find in NutraSweet or Equal. For me, like high fructose corn syrup, aspartame is that other one that's 100% no in my house. Because it has such incredible neurological effects that are negative for people, and it can break the blood-brain barrier, which means that it can have, effects for headaches. Some people actually reported like higher levels of gout when they take these out. That's fine. It has addictive properties to it. I have a friend who's a nutritionist who talked about the fact that in her younger years as a kid, she had a seizure disorder, but when she eliminated this aspartame from her diet because she had it in really high quantities, her seizures did go away, no medication. So it can have a lot of problems. The problem is that there's wood alcohol in that product, and when you raise that to 98.6 degrees in your body, some studies show that it can turn to formaldehyde, and that can break the blood-brain barrier and just cause a whole lot of neurological distress. So that's an issue. There's not many things that can break the blood-brain barrier, so you really just want to be careful that what is getting in is going to be positive, like something like an OPC3, an antioxidant of that sort. Now, saccharin is what you find in Sweet and Low, which has been reported to have carcinogenic properties. And again, it's like if there's other ways to sweeten things, the diet industry, people started with the artificial sweeteners to say that they were going to lose weight, but the studies show that people who are using aspartame and saccharin actually are 10 pounds heavier than everybody else. So if you're thinking about it, I understand people trying to drop sugar from their diet. The occasional use of, let's say, Splenda, which is sucralose, is okay in small amounts. I mean, studies are showing that there's only negative effects to your liver or whatever if you're consuming 1,700 packets a day. So unless you're that diabetic that has replaced everything with Splenda in their house so that they're getting it in high quantities, you should be fine to have one in your tea or your coffee or throw some in your Greek yogurt or whatever. I don't think that that's a really big issue. There's about the equivalent of 1 sucralose packet in an entire canister of TLS shakes, as an example. It's the last ingredient. So that's really okay. It's just, why not use sucralose or other types of sweeteners on occasion versus the aspartame and the saccharin that are going to have some kind of a negative effect. And then, of course, you've got sugar alcohols. That's when you're going to see maltitol or sorbitol or xylitol on the side of an ingredient list, which you'll find a lot in like Jell-O, pudding, gums, things of that nature. Now, the xylitol in gum, if you can find it without the aspartame, is great because it has shown to have dental benefits to it when taking that. So that's okay, but really in small amounts, again, in like under 5 grams, it should be fine. The thing is, sometimes you find like a protein bar or something, and it's got 17 or 18 grams of sugar alcohols in it, and it could cause a major amount of GI distress. So if you're wondering, hey, I had a South Beach bar or something, and all of a sudden I've got gas pains, or I've got diarrhea, or you just don't feel good, or you have more cravings, that's obviously a problem. So sugar alcohols are not sugar or alcohol, but really it's a sweetener. In Whole Food markets, you can find maltitol in a bag, to actually use as a sweetener, but they use it, and it's apparently not supposed to have an effect on your blood sugar, but as we know, it could still create cravings. So other low glycemic impact sweetener options, if used in smaller quantities, would be these. Coconut palm sugar is made, so this is actually a sugar, but it's made from coconut trees, and it's considered to be low glycemic impact. The quality of it is going to vary. on the time of the year, the region, the company that's producing it. The other thing to consider is it's not a sustainable industry, meaning a tree, like a palm tree, can only either produce coconuts or this coconut palm sugar. So coconuts are already at an all-time high, and people are wanting the coconut meat and the milk and the oil and stuff like that. But you can't have that and also be making the coconut palm sugar. So I think that just comes down to, like, in your head where you want to go with that. Some people say that they really like the way it tastes. I just am not a fan of necessarily having to when I feel like I have plenty of other options that are out there, and really would prefer to have all the other coconut ingredients and not, like, participate in that. Because once you turn a tree into a coconut palm sugar tree, you can't turn it back into a coconut producing tree. But it has a lot of hype right now. I know Dr. Oz has talked about it as a good low GI alternative. Then you have stevia, which is derived from a Peruvian plant, which is 500 times sweeter than sugar. Some people like the taste, some people really don't. Sometimes you're going to see it in the store with a branded name like Truvia or whatever. And apparently it has no effect on the blood sugar, again, except for what we talked about, that your body could be tricked into an insulin spike. But just look out for brands. If you do like the stevia, make sure it's just stevia that's in it. Once something moves from a Whole Foods market in the supplement section into the food industry, into the grocery section, now all of a sudden maybe you have companies that are adding other things to the stevia to make it their own and brand it. So you just have to kind of watch out for that. And then you've got agave, which there's definitely a lot of mixed feeling on this. I guess in the same way that high fructose corn syrup, though I wouldn't put them in the same category, it is also considered to be low GI. You can look at a label that says that it's GI. I look for raw and organic. Now, they still have to process it to like 145 degrees, so you can't really call it raw, but they do call it raw and organic, and there's better quality and lower quality. And again, it comes down to the levels of fructose and glucose, just like we talked about before. So when some companies process their agave, they're really altering the percentage of the fructose and glucose, so it doesn't really mirror the way it came from the agave plant. And that's when you really run into trouble. And how you're able to determine that on a label, I don't really have a good answer for. So again, it's just something maybe in small quantities. If you want something that's more syrup-like instead of honey, the agave may be a pretty way to go in small quantities. And then you can also look online if you want to get crazy. Low quat, way low. These are other just options of low glycemic impact, sugar alternatives that really just come from, botanical or dairy, sources or whatever, and you can get those online typically. So in creating new habits, again, you just want to kind of set small achievable goals. What you focus on expands. If you keep your goals clearly in front of you, you use the tools that you have, the coaching that you get, the journaling, the supplements, having pictures of the way you imagine yourself to be or the way you were, just so you know where you're headed away from. I like accountability until things become second nature, because, again, it's like once you know, like you have certain things that are just habitual, and if you think about how that habit formed, you just at one point something started to click, you got a good response from it, and you just kept doing it, and now it's like you don't even think about it. But you have to start by identifying the habits that you have, the triggers that you have, and then start just replacing them with new ones that will give you the same positive effect and satisfaction without feeling deprived, so that eventually that reinforcing feeling will then continue, and you'll be able to just continue with those really good habits. So hopefully this was really helpful, and we'll see you next time for the next TLS webinar.